Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. Today we welcome Jackie Cummings Koski, a single mom of one adult daughter who retired as a millionaire at the age of 49. She is the author of the recently released F.I.R.E for Dummies. Jackie earned CFP and AFC credentials and went back to school to get a master's degree in financial planning and financial therapy from Kansas State University. Today's episode is jam-packed with FIRE movement tips. Enjoy the show.
Jackie, welcome back to the Modern Husbands Podcast. It is so good to see you and to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, Christian, I'm happy to be here and glad to hang out with you guys. How's it going?
Oh, it's so good. It wasn't as good just a couple minutes because we weren't hanging out with you, but
oh, look at that. I'll take it. You see me blushing over here, but yeah, it's always fun to hang out with you guys. So yeah, I'm excited to be talking with you, and of course, one of my favorite topics, FIRE.
Yes, tell us about what got you into the financial independence movement. What makes you so passionate about it?
Yeah, I think for me, it definitely started with financial literacy, which is how I connected with all of you guys, basically. So, growing up, I really didn't learn much about money at all. We grew up in poverty, so I knew a lot about scarcity and not having enough money and that sort of being the reason for not doing so many things. Like, for instance, growing up, I never went to summer camp. Why? Because we didn't have the money for it. So once I sort of unlocked the basic personal finance and financial literacy, I started really getting so interested in, okay, what else can I do? What else is there? And, once you kind of start digging and digging, you've got that curiosity. I found the FIRE movement. And for the things that were confusing me, because some personal finance topics, bombshell is very complex. And so when I started digging in some of the complex stuff, I was getting a little confused again. And it was the FIRE movement and some voices in the FIRE movement that made so many things that confused me for a long time, made it so much simpler. Like, for instance, how much do you need to retire? Well, I heard all these different complex things, running Monte Carlo simulations, all that. But for the FIRE movement, it's a simple 25 times your expenses. I'm like, oh, okay, I can do math. Like, that makes total sense. And there was just so many things that I just connected with and understood a lot better in how a lot of people in the FIRE movement were explaining them. And I'm like, this is it. It needs to be boiled down to in a very simplistic way, because if I, who had done a lot of research, spent a lot of time learning, about personal finance and all that, I had trouble understanding some of these complex topics. I know many other people did. So that was the main thing that attracted me to it, is how simple it was, which allowed me to kind of more easily put a plan together that applied to me, and I actually knew what I was doing.
Right on. In the spirit of simplifying, what is FIRE, real quick, for any listeners who might be familiar?
And that is important. And honestly, a lot of people that I'm around, especially people that I grew up with that's not around this, they have never heard of FIRE and don't know what it is. So FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. The acronym is new, but the concept behind it really isn't. It's the old adage of live on less than you earn and invest the difference, except you speed up the process a little bit more.
I lived that growing up with my father. He was FIRE before FIRE was an acronym, and he's actually here. He's downstairs. I should have grabbed him for the podcast, but he retired early, and he did a lot of investing, not just in the market but also in rental properties. And he is right now wearing the zip bicycle pants where you can zip off the legs, because he doesn't want to buy shorts and pants. So it's 2 in 1. And they're probably fit.
Those all the time.
You do too? But are yours 2 different colors?
I don't. Now I have pants and shorts separately. But like growing up, all through grade school, high school, like I was rocking those all the time.
Oh gosh.
But his are 2 different colors because he's a cyclist. When he cycles, he unzips so the pants are off and the shorts are on. And so the legs are one color green and the shorts are faded. And so it looks like he's got two different mix match, and he's got it right now. He's wearing a $12 Casio watch from Walmart.
There are a lot of bikers that only zip off the one leg for the bike.
That's good. I like that. I'll have to start to maybe nudge him into making that decision. Anyhow, the point is, you said 20. You are financially free when you can live off when you have enough invested or saved, I should say, of 25 times expenses. And I like how you frame that, because it's times expenses. So if you just keep your expenses low, it's a heck of a lot easier to be financially free. Like my dad said, he said, I've never budgeted. I don't need to, because I make the most frugal possible choice I can in every circumstance, unless your mother would say, nope, we have to do this. So anyhow, I've intervened.
Yeah, well, I love your dad, because I was the same thing. I was in the same place. I don't really like to do a budget. I'm not the greatest budgeting girl, but again, I look to spend my money as smartly as possible. Probably, because I grew up in poverty, and I always wanted to make sure I was getting the best deal. When I had to figure out my expenses, I had to go backwards. I subtracted out everything that I was investing. I subtracted out taxes, and whatever was left, that was what my expenses were.
Love it.
So, how old were you? I know we're not supposed to ask women their age, but how old were you when you obtained financial independence?
Yeah, well, the jig is up for me, because I've put my age all over the place. But for me, so my FIRE number, let's start with that, was, like I said, 25 times my expenses. I spent roughly $40,000 a year, go up and down a little bit, but multiply that times 25, and that's $1 million. So I hit that number while I was still working, and I was about 46, 47. Mentally, I wasn't quite ready to step away from my job, because, that's all I knew my whole life. So I worked a couple more years to just build up more of a nest egg. I just needed more of a cushion to feel comfortable. And also it helped me to, reimagine what my life would look like after I, left my company. And now I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. So I worked a couple more years. So I was 49 when I retired from my corporate job. And that was on December 6, 2019. So it's been almost 5 years, guys.
Now, I want to point out, though, and J.L. Collins brings this up. He's like, look, the FIRE is a nice acronym. It's easy to remember. But if you really pay attention to folks like you're not retired, you're working, you're just FI. You're financially independent. You can do whatever you want. I mean, we're going to talk about your book, F.I.R.E. for Dummies. So instantly I'm like, this is written for me. And for those of you that don't know the series, it's the yellow and red, book series where there's a bunch of them, quote for dummies. And so, Jackie's the author of F.I.R.E. for Dummies. And ultimately, she's still making money, but the idea of just being completely financially independent. You can work for yourself. You can go work for whatever company you want. And it's not money that's ultimately going to make the decision. It's your happiness. I think that's what draws a lot of people into this movement.
Yeah. And, going back to the, people that are, fired, they're really working. I mean, maybe not. So here's what the difference is. So not being tied to a job where they make the rules and they tell you what your metrics are. They tell you what your priorities are from day to day, week to week, year to year. And so when I separated from my company, I formally retired. They threw me a retirement party and everything. But I feel like the term retirement just does not mean what it used to mean. Even people at traditional retirement age are still doing something productive. And I don't believe that to give back to society and to do meaningful work, you don't have to be tied to a job. And sometimes it may make you money, sometimes not. And you and a lot of people overestimate, the money that I have coming in. I still withdraw from my portfolio. I'm not making big bucks doing what I'm doing. A lot of what I do are passion projects that, thank goodness, I have the luxury of doing it without feeling like I have to get paid in order to pay my bills. So like with the book, I mean, it takes a ton of time to write a book. There's a whole year practically. And so maybe it'll do well, maybe it won't, but I'm taking a chance. And you know what? If it doesn't do well, that's totally fine. I got my paycheck from my investments. So I'm probably not making as much as people think that I am, but I get to do what I love. If I work a 12-hour day, you know what? I'm still smiling because I'm working the 12-hour day because that's what I want to do. I'm getting some kind of reward. Maybe I helped kids at a underserved high school.
Right.
Maybe I'm putting out content that's going to help a lot of people, but that might not otherwise get this message. So I just want to be happy and proud with the work that I'm doing. And I do want to do my part in making society better. And it's great that I don't have to depend on a paycheck in order to do that.
And you're building a legacy because your family can point at that book and say, that's my daughter, that's my mother, whatever it may, my sister, whatever it may be. That might, I would imagine that has to be the most satisfying thing of not just all of your accomplishments, but to have this book sold at Barnes and Noble or wherever you walk in and say, that's my mom. Right?
Yeah, it is. I have one daughter, and that is the most part. And yeah, where I am in my life now, and I tell a lot of people this, that I'm kind of in legacy building mode, just like you said. I'm not going to be around forever. I did a lot of the things that I wanted to do. I raised my daughter. She's an amazing human being. I have put out content and shared my story, shared my knowledge, and all of those things. And I'm satisfied that, I'm contributing to society and leaving a legacy. And so that part is so much more important to me. And I think about the 20-year-old Jackie. I didn't think about things like that, but I think about them now. Building a legacy is really important to me.
So as you talk about building this legacy, but before, as you even hit your FIRE number, you said you're mentally not ready to step away from your job, and now you're finding things that really you have a passion in that you want to do. Can you walk us through a little bit about the mindsets and the psychology of getting to that point, getting to and involved in this FIRE movement?
Yeah, and that is super important, Bruce, because I ended up making the psychology behind FIRE one of the very early chapters, because you can't even get into the money stuff until you mentally are ready to move forward and to want to do something different.
Right.
And so,
your mind around.
Yeah, you really do, because
you can't retire until what's the age? 67. Is the official retirement age, and then people are like, no, I can't retire until my 70s. Like that's what my parents did. That's what their parents did. That's what everyone around me is doing. There's a whole mindset and culture around that.
Yes, culture is a big deal. Yeah, culture, community. Yeah, culture, community, and all of that. Because FIRE. I can spell out the acronym, but when you look at the FIRE community and the FIRE movement, you got some different things going on. And, if you're doing, if you're trying to reach FIRE, you're trying to retire decades earlier than what society tells you should, that is definitely a big mental shift. But not only that, just going back to the financial literacy and personal finance stuff, a lot of us, we didn't learn about this growing up. We might have some trauma around it. We might have some adversities that we had to overcome. And you're seeing everybody else doing all these things, 70% savings rate and some of these things you see in the media. And you're like, oh, I make, $60,000 a year. There's no way I can say, so there's so many messages out there, and maybe they'll find one real example, but that typically doesn't represent, what the FIRE community is. It's about supporting your goals of trying to decouple from a corporate job so that you can do what you really love, or whatever that job is. Now, the real superpower is for someone that loves their job. You guys are in the teaching space. Okay. Yeah. If I was a teacher, you know what? I may not even want to retire. But then, Brian, we go back to the financial independence part, just saying, for any reason, if I needed or wanted to walk away, I could, because a job is not just, the work that you do. It's politics at work. It is sometimes legislation that might change the way you are a teacher. So to have the ability to go off and do it the way you want to do it is very valuable. Even if you love the work, it doesn't mean, you love everything about your job and you're not the only one in control of that job. There's other moving parts that you don't have control over. So the mental part, acknowledge your strengths, acknowledge your weaknesses. We all have, superpowers that might help us get there a little bit faster. Like, for instance, I live in a low cost of living area. That has helped me tremendously because, my mortgage is not that much and things like that. But other people might have something like, maybe they're in a high income industry. Maybe they're a physician and that's their superpower. They got a really high income. So yeah, the mental part, I always ask people to give themselves some grace, especially if you happen to be a late starter or you didn't know anything about this personal finance stuff. That's okay. Most of us didn't. The average American probably is a late starter, but acknowledgement goes a long way. And then finally, you will get to the point where you're ready to say, okay, I know that I'm good at this, I'm not good at that, or whatever. Here's how I should craft my journey. It's not just like these other people, because I had to figure all that stuff out. Because the early FIRE people, the avatar was just like you guys, right? They were white, male, engineer, high income, a lot of times no kids. And so I wasn't that, but I didn't just turn them off. I learned a lot from them, and I took the pieces that were valuable to me, or I made adjustments for my situation. So I mentally had to get my head around it, because how easy would it have been for me to say, well, I'm not a white male engineer. I don't think I can do this. That would have been really easy. But I didn't take the easy way because I was so curious and I knew I wanted something different. I just needed to figure that out for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, a lot of the folks who critique the FIRE movement writ large, like, they are solely pointing to those examples where it's like, right, wait a minute, this person has a trust fund. Like, are we sure that this is the journey that we want to be, elevating and amplifying? But speaking to the journey, and I know Bruce has another question coming, but the phrase, it's not the destination, it's the journey. Was there a moment while you were, building up to your number during which you reflected back and thought, whoa, like, this is a really incredible experience, even though I'm not at my number yet?
Right. Yeah. So during the bulk of the time that I was on my FIRE journey, my daughter was a teenager or in her early 20s. And I would say the funnest part was having her cheer me along. And she was getting it. She was understanding that, oh yeah, well, now I wouldn't want to work until I'm 60. Or, mom, you're able to do this and that. So having her watch along the way and see what I was doing, and she got really curious and I would explain things to her. So that was probably my favorite part. And so anytime, there was an article or I did a podcast or write a book or whatever, she was right there watching me. And it just was so cool to kind of see her eyes light up about certain things, to know that I changed the taboo of talking about money. She, not only does she invest, she invests in the stock market. She's very comfortable with it. I definitely wasn't until I was like almost 40, but she even taught her fiance, about investing. And, that's kind of like the roles reversed, because typically boys are more likely to get into investing. I mean, that's what I see. And that's what a lot of the stats show. Yeah. And so it's kind of nice that I saw in the early days how she's watching me and what I'm doing with finances and working towards FIRE, and to see so many of the things that stuck with her. So I had a lot of fun because she was a little bit older, where she understood a lot of this. So I would say those were parts of the journey that I really loved. And we still, enjoyed and had a great time. Like, we went to Ireland together. So I get this question all the time about, what did you have to cut back? And because I was like your dad, Brian, I didn't really have to cut anything back. I just, was doing smart things with the money. And no matter what I spend money on, whether it's a huge vacation or vehicle, whatever, I'm going to try to do it the smartest way possible. But it doesn't mean I need to cut those things out. So we did some great trips together, even now. And for the longest, we go to dinner once a week. Sometimes we'll go to a really nice restaurant, like a steakhouse or something. Other times we'll go to a brewery and get some wings and some beer. It doesn't matter, just spending that time with her. And that started when I was going through my FIRE journey. And if you probably asked her, well, did your mom make you live like a monk or something like that? It's like, no, we're doing the same thing now that we did, 5 years ago. And so yeah, that was the funnest part. Just probably the time that I had with my daughter and some of the experiences or the memory dividends that we created during that window.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
How do you organize your finances for FIRE once you get this spark? What are the systems you put in place?
So a lot of FIRE people are known to be spreadsheet nerds, but there is a lot of apps and things out there now. Now, because I started with a spreadsheet, I'm completely spoiled because I could never find an app that has all the different tabs and little pieces of information that I want to look at. Just mentally, I organize them just to think about the fact that, one of the main unique things is that I have a window of time where I'm retiring from the time I retire to the time I reach 59 and a half. So that's usually the biggest piece you have to solve for, because a lot of the retirement accounts, as you know, you can't take money out until you're 59 and a half. And of course, when I did my digging, there were so many different ways that you could do that. So I had to organize that and figure that piece out. Things like, if you have a Roth IRA, the contributions can come out tax-free, just the contributions, not the growth. And I've been contributing to my Roth for 20 years. So that was an option. And also just a brokerage account, the importance of that, to be able to use it as a bridge account before I turn 59 and a half. And I guess the other thing, trying to, get organized and tracking all this and figuring this out was, health insurance. That's the other big question. What do you do about health insurance?
Yeah.
And it is really, is it not such a commentary on healthcare and health insurance in America, that when you're thinking about retiring early, that's one of the number one things you have to think about, because it's so coupled with tightly wound with your job, and the thing is, when you're asking that, you're forgetting about, the FIRE community is not unique to having to find health insurance that's not tied to your job. You got entrepreneurs. You have people that have jobs that don't offer health insurance at all. So all those people had to figure it out. And so that was a part that that really confused me. I didn't know how to even approach that, but I started doing, everything is figure outable. So I started doing my research. You've got the, Affordable Care Act. That's a great option for people. Even some people will look at, health share ministries. That's not really health insurance, but, if that's an option that works for them, that's great. But I know a couple of presentations that I did, I have 7 different options for health insurance before 65, or if you decide to retire early. So figuring that stuff out, you do have to kind of organize things and figure out, what your expenses are going to look like and things like that. But yeah, those are just a few of the things.
It is truly wild that the 2 most common benefits that employees receive are accidents. The reason that we are paid healthcare through employers is because of a wage freeze from World War II, and employers needed to try to attract better employees or attract more employees. And so the wage freeze was only for wages. It wasn't for healthcare. So what do? They're like, okay, well, we'll offer to pay their healthcare. At no point was it born from this idea of oh, this is the best system for America. And the 401k is an accident. That was a guy who was looking for a creative way to basically offset some taxes for high comp employees, and read the code, the IRS code, which is, I think it's a 401k code.
Right.
And it was like, I think this will work. I think. And he didn't even know for sure. And he was like, let's give it a shot and see if I'm breaking the law. And then it just turns into something that employers use as how we fund retirement, and it replaces pensions. Again, just some dude that's like, I think this will work. Let's
And
try.
Brian, that is the history teacher coming out in you, to know the history of both of those, for sure. But you're exactly right. And I don't know if you guys ever look at the New York Times. They also put their articles online. But the last Sunday, they came out with an article. It was the magazine was all about retirement, and it talked about that exact same thing, about the history of 401ks. And, there was some assertions that, should we just redo the whole thing? Should we go back to pensions? But it was a very interesting article talking about how and most people don't even know that that's how 401ks got created.
Yeah. Oh, and for our listeners, we're not advocating for different systems. I can assure you, I'm not smart enough to know what system would be better. I don't profess to be an expert in that. I just know what the facts are behind it. So,
but here's what I can tell you, Brian, along those lines is that, okay, so talking about systems, and we're not looking to change the system. We work, within the system. And
right.
If you want to advocate, and there's something so important like financial literacy, we obviously do want to change that system to offer personal finance in every high school. But here's one that's very related to what I believe was the rise of the FIRE movement, was the shift from pensions, which was defined benefit plans, to 401ks and TSPs and 403bs and defined contribution plans. Okay. So basically we went from saying, oh yeah, we've got these highly intelligent, highly credentialed, experienced hedge fund managers that's managing these pension plans, the pension funds for these companies to take care of the employees. We moved from that to saying, oh no, we're not doing that anymore. Now you employees, you need to figure this out. We know you're not a credential professional. We know you're not an investment expert. Well, we're not none of that, but you know what? You're going to have to figure it out just like they did. And some people, like the FIRE community, said, okay, we'll take you up on that, except we think we can do it in less than 40 years.
There are interesting pros and cons about comparing a pension system to a defined contribution system, right? Not defined benefit. And I'm one where I struggle being limited in having any freedom. So I like the thought of having control over my decisions, which is what's so empowering about what you've done in the FIRE movement. But the problem is that when the government and employers decided, let's just make them figure it out without even offering a class, without
education, none of that.
And no real regulations, like, hey, it's okay if they charge you 3% commissions, or it's okay if they get they being the financial planner, a cut of whatever product they're offering. So now they're selling you, dog crap in a bag and calling it investments. They're doing that legally.
Yeah, the 403b world for teachers. I mean, that's way worse than what we see in the 401k plan and plans at work, because we have one vendor. Like, I was shocked when I knew that teachers, they have to choose their vendor, but also the thrift savings plans. That's the federal government and employer-sponsored retirement plan. That's amazing. And it's like, well, why can't we all have that? But, there's so many different systems depending on your employer.
Yes.
And I want to add, if you are concerned about the fees you're paying, go to 403b Wise. They do a great job helping you root out fees, because fees compound. So one thing that I've seen lately, a law that could really help the everyday person, is to make the company pay the 401k fee. So for folks that have 401ks, whoever sets those 401ks up, the financial industry that sets those up, they charge a fee. They pass that fee on to us. So that fee might be 1%, 1.5%. It might be really high for people in small businesses. Just pass a law that says employers have to pay that fee. So now I'm not I don't have to deal with that. Right. So anyhow.
Right. Yeah, and that happens a lot where whoever is selling 401k plans to the employer, a lot of times the employer have no idea. They're trying to run their business. So how much do they know? So
Exactly.
when Mr. Whoever or Mrs. Whoever comes in and says, "Oh, you don't have to worry about the fee. We just pass that on to your employees and it's spread out. So it makes it easy." And they'll be like, "Yeah, that's fine." So you never know what conversation is going on and how you end up paying a fee. A lot of times larger companies, maybe they'll have a little bit more wiggle room and they'll offer some better provisions and things like that. But yeah, the whole shift from pension plans to 401ks and 403bs, I think gave rise to people having to, whether you want to or not, having to think about managing their own money, managing their own investments, managing their own retirement, and figuring all of this stuff out. And you just had, some people that said, "Okay, I think I can figure this out better than you did."
Jackie, what are some of your favorite hacks to increase saving and investing commitments?
My favorite hacks. Well, knowledge is sometimes I consider that a hack, but curiosity definitely helps a lot.
Yeah.
Some of my things, one of my favorite, Brian, this is like health savings accounts, right?
Yeah.
So I started with a health savings account, HSA, and I always say it out because it gets confused often with a flexible spending account, and they're very, very different. A health savings account. Well, I first learned about them when, again, through my employer, when they first started offering high deductible plans, and then it was partnered with a health savings account. They were giving us big bucks to put into that health savings account as seed money. I think the first year they offered it, it was around 2008. And I think they put in like $800 a year. And I can't remember what the family maximum was at the time. I'm guessing it was around 4,000 or something like that. So I'm like, "Oh, this sounds great." And once I realized it wasn't like the flexible spending account, use it or lose it, and I could roll it over and, ooh, I could invest in it too. So I'm like, this sounds like another extra account that I can use and it's going to grow. So not only am I putting in the max each year, it's going to grow at, I don't know, 8%, 10%, 12, however the fund grew within my account, which it was probably just a total stock market, index fund. So when I figured out like all the extra benefits from getting that, I don't even know if the term triple tax savings was around, but when I knew that I could invest in it, that was great. I knew that it reduced my taxable income, so that was great. I knew that I could roll it over from year to year and I could choose to use it whenever I wanted to. And then I came back and realized that when I make contributions through my employer's, through payroll, through my employer, I don't even pay FICA tax. So that's Social Security and Medicare tax. I don't even have to pay that. So that was probably one of my biggest hacks. But early on, when I was asking questions, I was asking the benefits department, the HR department, nobody knew anything. They could not guide me. So I went digging on my own and I figured out so much stuff. And so to this day, I was, considered one of the early adapters. And so I talk about it a lot. I even train and teach other financial planners about health savings accounts because there's so many nuances and so many financial planning topics that is touched by, this HSA. So now my HSA is worth like over $200,000. So I see it as another retirement account, except I got a tax break in the beginning. I got a tax break while it's growing, and I get a tax break when I'm ready to take it out, as long as it's for, qualified healthcare expenses. And, one thing I know, I've been young and healthy most of my life, thank goodness, and my daughter as well. But I know my health expenses are more likely to be greater in the future than they have been in the past. So that's probably one of my biggest hacks. But, little things like that as you go, learning things like, Roth, Roth conversions.
Yeah.
When I retired, I had several lower income years where it made sense to take some of that traditional retirement money and roll it over just a little bit at a time, just enough to actually not have to pay little or no taxes on it. So yeah, there's a lot of little hacks like that, Christian.
Well, you brought up the fact that you don't have to pay payroll tax on HSA contributions. That's the only product that works that way. You cannot dodge payroll taxes with a 401k.
What about strategies for reducing our debt, expenses, taxes? That I know the HSA can help with some of that,
Right.
but what other strategies do you have for us?
Yeah, those are important to look at because, like, the broad picture that I always like to paint in terms of wealth building, a FIRE, they're very similar. Is increase your savings, your investing, and your income, but decrease all the things you said: your debt, your taxes, and your expenses. And some of my biggest tips for that is for taxes. A lot of people are afraid of taxes, but you do have some control over it. You mentioned the HSA. Also, things like the money that you're putting in your 401k or your retirement account. If that's traditional, then it's going to reduce your taxable income. And I remember thinking of paying taxes when I started maxing out my 401k. I looked at the money that I was saving, or the money that was not going to the IRS and paying my taxes, was going into my 401k account. So I was sort of rerouting that money. Other things like, and some people will get a little discouraged if they have a lot of debt, because that will keep them from having more free cash flow to save and to invest and things like that. So you got to look at debt. And, there's always that question about, should I pay off my debt, or should I start saving and investing? And, we are a society of multitaskers. You can do both. And so I like to say, look at just the split. So for instance, if you do have a lot of debt, and let's say you got an extra, $500 that you can either put towards your debt or invest. Well, if you want to get rid of your, I say start with your high interest debt. If you want to start getting rid of your debt, okay, maybe 400 of that $500 goes towards your debt, and you still do $100 in investing. Like, continually building that muscle. Like, we can lift two weights at the same time. So why not just do that? Because I want you to build that savings muscle. As the debt goes down, then maybe that $500, now your debt is almost nothing. Now you're down to maybe $200 towards the debt, and then putting, a lot more towards your saving and investing. So debt doesn't have to drown you. But I know it can be extremely daunting when you have debt, everything from student loan debt, which is kind of handled, differently than other types of debt. But, especially once you get out of college, you've got, you've got mortgages, you've got car debts and things like that. So one of the other early chapters, which I thought was important, was knowing where you're starting. So that means you have to know what your debt is. You need to know what the interest rates are on your debt, how to prioritize your debt. For instance, student loans, if you're on an income-driven repayment plan, or you're going from public service loan forgiveness, that is very low priority debt because it's timed. Okay. But if you've got, these days a mortgage for 8%, that might, that's longer term debt. So that might not be the highest, but what if you got a car, you got a car loan when you had, bad credit, and you're paying, 15%. That's going to go up there. What if you got crazy credit cards debt where it's 29%? That becomes higher priority. What if you were struggling at a time in your life where you have a payday loan that's 58%, so that gets higher priority. So you got to know where you're starting and organize your finances before you can kind of decide the best approach to tackle things. So debt is the biggest, almost bigger than like your investing part, knowing how to get that organized. And then with the taxes, I just feel like a lot of people are scared of it. But if you start, here's a fun exercise. Go back and look at the taxes that you did this year and look at the first page. There's some important lines there. Look at what your income was initially, then look at your adjusted gross income. Those numbers are probably different. So what made it lower? And then even after your adjusted gross income, then you've got the standard deduction, more than likely. Most people take the standard deduction. They don't itemize. So when you take the standard deduction, that lowers it even more. So someone that's making $80,000, you may only be paying taxes on $50,000 if you are contributing to your 401k, contributing to your HSA, you get the standard deduction. So that was clicking for me when I understood how those work. Now, when I normally print out my taxes, or if I see the number of pages, it's freaking 30 pages. So nobody wants to look at that. But the first page tells a lot. And if you just understand kind of how those three main different tax numbers work, you can have it work to your advantage. It's not just the wealthy people that can benefit from understanding taxes.
I love that exercise, because you're speaking to my heart now. So you're looking at, AGI. Let's make this real simple. So you have, imagine this line, and there's this line of it's your threshold, that underneath that line, you're determining whether or not you're going to take the standard deduction, which is what about 80% of people take, which it's around 12 or 13,000 if you're single, 24 to 28,000 if you're married. I don't remember.
It's a lot. They with one of the most recent, like a few years ago, maybe even more, with one of the laws really jacked it up. So so for an individual, I think it's like you said, it's around 14, double that for a married couple.
You got it. Yeah, it's high. Now it sunsets in 2025 unless there's a new.
So that'll be interesting.
But anyhow, when you think deduction, just think that's the amount of money you're not taxed on. Okay, that's the bottom line. So if you take the standard deduction, you're not taxed on that. Okay, so you've got that line. Anything below that, you either itemize or take the standard deduction. You can't do both. Right. It's one or the other. So if your items, your line items, like the interest on your mortgage, as an example, common deduction, if those items add up to being less than your standard deduction, you just take the standard. Okay, now this is what's important. Go back to the line, right? Back to the line. 401ks, HSAs, those are above the line tax deductions, meaning you can take all of those tax deductions and you can take the standard deduction. That's how you can avoid paying taxes, or a lot of taxes, by taking advantage of both. So the more you contribute into a 401k up to, whatever the threshold is, let's say it's 20,000 now, the more that you contribute to your HSA, which I think the deduction is over 7,000 now.
Right, for a family,
For a family. So you're talking about, $25,000, $30,000 and all of these deductions before you even get to the other deductions below the line, like a standard deduction. And if you're in a family, there's another 25,000. So you can get your taxable income, if you're an everyday person, down to, I don't want to say zero, but pretty doggone low. And that means that if it's really low, your taxable income's low, your tax rate's like 10%. You're not paying tax.
Or less. And Brian, there's Teacher Brian coming out. You did a great job of explaining that. And you got the visuals and everything too. So I got it. But so one of the other benefits of, reaching FIRE and not being tied to a job is that now you have a lot more flexibility with what your income looks like, right? Yeah. So since I retired, so it's been 4 tax years, and 3 out of the 4 tax years, my effective tax rate was 0. Oh, and it was because of all those deductions you're talking about, and the fact that, I have a small business. So, the way that your business taxes work is it's the net of your income. Yes, exactly. And then I could even, deduct, my health insurance and things like that. But because I have more control of that, I can decide, do I want to pull out, tax-free money in my Roth, or do I want to pull money out of some of my brokerage accounts? And then there's a little bit of that. So I'm looking at all those, talking about organizing your finances. So I'm looking at all those things. So my effective tax rate for 3 out of the 4 years was 0% tax rate. And I also remember, so I remember my retirement date was December 6, 2019, which meant it was right before the pandemic, right? And that year, I had a decent year. Now, my average over the last 10 years that I worked before I retired was about $80,000 a year. But the last year, which was 2019, I was at about $90,000, maybe $95,000, right? But remember those stimulus checks? So those stimulus checks, you had to make under 80,000, okay? So because I had maxed out my 401k traditional and maxed out my HSA, I was below the $80,000. They went by AGI. So I qualified for both or 3, I don't even remember how many, stimulus checks because I made those contributions. Had I not, I would have been above that hard cutoff and I wouldn't have gotten the stimulus checks. But it just kind of made me think about the fact that, so if you had, when I talk to my friends and they'll say, oh yeah, I didn't qualify. I'm like, oh, that means you make the big bucks or you're not contributing to your 401k.
Right. Yeah. And I'm super glad that you that you brought that up. And I want to add one little nugget, because I don't want people who aren't tax nerds like us to think, wait a second, they don't pay any tax. Oh, we pay all kinds of taxes. We pay,
Okay.
if we own a home, we pay property taxes. If we rent, the property taxes are baked into the rent. You pay sales tax.
Yeah.
I mean, you're taxed in a lot of different ways. So what we're talking about is federal income tax. Federal income tax.
Yeah, because then you've got state income taxes. Some counties or city areas will have taxes and things like that. And hey, look, it is really important to know that, we're working within a system. Like you said, we are not there to change the system. If you want to take on a project and you want to be an advocate, that's great. But the point I like to make is we always hear about the wealthy people taking advantage of the tax system. And the word advantage is probably not appropriate, but they maximize and optimize their tax situation. Yes. Well, the everyday person can do that too.
Exactly.
The wealthy people, it's just times 100 or times 1,000. But hey, I'm happy if I save, a couple $1,000 because I did my tax in a more smart way. So anybody can do that by understanding some of these tax things. And so that goes back to, lowering your taxes and a lot of people just don't think that they have control over their tax situation. And there are many things that you can do to actually reduce the amount of money you're paying in taxes, both state and federal. With state, a lot of states, you get a tax break for contributing to a 529 plan, or they have their own standard deductions and things like that.
You got it. Yeah, well said.
So important to understand expenses, taxes, and just as you said, how we can optimize that.
Yeah.
I did want to ask a quick question too that some of our listeners may be wondering as we get back into, we started this talking about debts as well. Can you fire with debts?
Okay. The answer is yes, because I did. So I fired with debt. Again, not all debt is created equal. For instance, let's say someone is on an income-driven repayment plan. Okay.
Right.
So why would you be in a rush to pay that off? And frankly, once you stop working and the income-driven repayment plan is based on your income, and now you have no income. Yeah. So that's just an example. For me, in particular, my debt at the time of my retirement was my home or my mortgage. Okay. So, but I had to do some research, and I put a lot of thought into all these pieces, especially a big piece like that. Well, my interest rate was very low. Having that type of debt did not keep me up at night. So it wasn't emotionally taxing on me or anything, because it becomes a very psychological thing, how you feel about debt. It didn't bother me at all. So that was just part of my expenses going into retirement. And frankly, I live in a low cost of living area. So I think my total mortgage payment was like $1,100. I know it's really low. So if you're in New York or you're in California, I'm sorry, but I live in Ohio. You guys, you live in Ohio. So my mortgage was about $1,100. That includes principal, the taxes, insurance, and principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Right. I'm like, what did I miss? Okay. So all four of those pieces. Well, I looked at, if I would have paid my mortgage off, I still would have been paying about $600 a month. Why? Because you still got taxes and insurance. So I pay a lot in taxes, a lot in property taxes, and then you've got the insurance. So it would have cut down $500 of my mortgage payment. But I still would have had a piece left. But my interest rate was so low, I made a conscious, proactive decision to not pay it off. So yes, you can go into it with debt. Now, probably if you've got high interest debt, like a lot of credit card debt, because it's so inefficient to have that, right? You're paying that compound interest, working in the opposite way. We want compounding on our investments, not on the debt that we're paying to somebody else. So if you've got high interest credit card debt, because it's just so hard to get ahead. If you've got high interest, a payday loan, those exist for some people. Those are like top priority. Or if you have a high interest car payment, things like that. And when I say high interest, I generally mean higher than the cost of inflation or the rate of inflation. Typically that's around 4%. So my mortgage was less than that. So I just did the math that way. My vehicles were paid off. I've been paying cash for vehicles for a while now, so I didn't have that. And that's part of why my expenses are so low. I don't have a ton of debt. And I know that a lot of people's income, a big chunk of it, goes towards servicing their debt. And I don't really have that piece dragging me down. So getting rid of that debt, it really lightens your load. So now the 25 times your expenses could be a lot longer than you thought it would be once you think about getting rid of, certain debts that you have.
So we like to end all of our podcasts with one piece of simple but actionable advice that you want to leave our listeners with. So what would that simple, actionable piece be?
I think the biggest action, honestly, is knowing where you're starting. So even if FIRE is not attractive to you, you're not even interested in FIRE, but you want to get your finances together, is know where you are. That's knowing things like, what is your net worth? I know you guys talk about that on the show. How much debt do you have, and what is the interest on those debts? How would you prioritize those debts? Do you understand your taxes? Is there something more efficient you can do with that? So just organizing your finances just to see where you are and go from there. Honestly, you may end up being more impressed than you ever thought, and in a better place than you ever imagined you would be. But you will never know unless you organize your finances and know where you're at.
Now, Jackie, I know we are going to provide the link to the book, which again, it's FIRE for Dummies. But also you have a podcast. Can you share a little bit about your podcast?
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. My co-host will get me really mad if I don't mention it, but I love it. It's called Catching Up to F.I.R.E. So we discovered that there was a ton of people that feel like they are behind with their finances. They never learned about it, and they were doing so many things wrong. And they asked the question, how do I get back on track? I am way behind. How do I catch up? And a lot of times it doesn't really have a ton to do with age. It could be maybe someone who immigrated to this country where they kind of had to start a little bit behind. Or it could be someone that realizes in their 30s that they have nothing saved and a ton of debt, and they know they're not on track. So we serve that middle, and helping people try to catch up because they don't have the value or the benefit of compound growth like the 40 or 50 years. And, for the ones that are a little bit older, I would say the bulk of our community is between 40s and 50s, because most people seem, including the media, seem to be talking to the baby boomers because they have all the money, or they're talking to millennials because they're bulk of the workforce. Where the 40 and 50-year-olds, the Gen Xers, are in the middle. Nobody's talking to us. So we are filling that void so that people know that there's others like them, and that there are some special things, both benefits that you have or advantages that you could be taken advantage of, and trying to give them a little bit of hope and know that they should just give themselves a little grace, and that it's still possible to either retire early or on time or whatever they want to do, but it's never too late. So it's been a fun community. It's grown like crazy. We got a podcast. The community is on Facebook, very, very active. And it's just amazing how many people has flocked to this platform. So it made us realize, there was a big need for this, and we're glad that we created it. And it's just growing and growing and growing.
And you can find that at catchinguptofi.com. I'm here now. Beautiful website. Love the podcast. Jackie, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was great, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.